Thank you. I just note that Mr. Barr's support for giving unvetted personnel access to the Treasury payment system with unsecured devices, hacking in not only U.S. taxpayers' information, but other information held by the Treasury, is neither patriotic nor is supported by the full committee. I want to ask a really dumb question first, and this is not a gotcha question. Does anybody disagree with the statement that price increases are inflationary? I see. Okay. So we agree that the tariff policy that Donald Trump is imposing to raise prices on imported goods is inflationary. I am sure we may have differences, we certainly have differences up here about the fiscal consequences of that, but it raises questions about what happens when the fiscal policy of the United States is at odds with the monetary policy of the Fed. One is trying to bring down inflation, one is actively working to bring it up. The 1890s show an example of what happens. I would rather not make America great again back in that time period, even though a lot of the White House seems to support what life was like in the 1890s. But for us to manage that, we are going to have to keep an eye on the data in the system. Do all of you support, as Chairman Powell indicated when he was a few weeks ago, that we have to make sure that data at the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics stays pure, stays accurate, stays untouched by political appointees trying to change that data?
Well, I think the accuracy and the purity of that data are absolute, and the credibility of that data are absolutely essential. Can I make a distinction between price increases?
Well, I want to just move on because I want to get to another point that is not as partisan, but I think more supported. But I appreciate you saying that, because when Donald Trump is saying that he wants to go in and put Schedule F employees, get rid of them, make this political, there's bad things that happen. I want to shift to a different issue. I've heard concerns from a number of people who I trust about the surging volumes of dollar-denominated deposits in non-U.S. banks. And specifically that, and I have a hard time getting data that's all, some of this, the data gets a little stale, but in 2021, global banks were holding over $15 trillion in dollar-denominated deposits. First quarter of 2023, it broke a streak of 3 consecutive contractions. It was an increase of $326 billion of U.S. dollar deposits in foreign banks. And so I guess, Dr. Cohn, given your work on the Federal Reserve Board, is that consistent with what you're seeing, that we're seeing increased dollar deposits in non-U.S. banks?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay. Have any of you seen this data or heard the concern before? Okay. The issue that's been raised to me by several folks is that there's a consistent bipartisan push at Treasury to have a strong dollar because it lowers our borrowing costs. That in turn makes the dollar very attractive for remittances. It makes the dollar very attractive, it makes our exports stronger. And if we have increased dollar deposits at U.S. banks, the FDIC doesn't regulate those banks. And so if there is a run on those dollars, there's a macroeconomic concern. And BIS recently noted that global banks are turning to increasingly flighty funding services to secure those. In the first half of 2023, dollar funding by money market funds to global banks went up by 53%, and most of that came in the form of repos. So I guess, Mr. Consul, I'll start with you. Are there any hidden risks sitting out there in the repo market? And should we be concerned about any broader contagion if there's a run on those dollars?
I don't know enough to comment. I apologize.
Anybody have any intel into that?
So I was a repo trader on the Federal Reserve. The repo loans are secured by Treasury collateral, so they are very safe. In the past, a lot of banks traded unsecured. There was credit risk then, but today it's a much more stable form of financing.
But I guess like the security of money market funds makes sense when we're looking in our own borders. And the concern I have is like, what happens if we have large volumes? I mean, maybe if any just want to answer academically, if you're not familiar with the immediate data, if you have large growing volumes of dollar deposits that are outside the FDIC system, and those are being backed by money market funds, should we be concerned about that? Like it seems like with all of the checks we have internal to our economy, we know how to regulate those because our banks are regulated in the U.S. What happens if you've got huge numbers of dollar deposits at the Bank of China?
Historically, what happens if we have dollar disturbances abroad is the Federal Reserve has foreign swap lines, FX swap lines, where they will lend to foreign central banks who in turn can support the dollar deposits in foreign jurisdictions.
But doesn't that then create an issue where like our foreign adversaries could potentially be creating a run that we would have to step in and backstop with taxpayer money?
That is possible depending on the jurisdiction. Not all jurisdictions have swap lines.
Yeah, I do think it's important for the authorities in the U.S. and globally to look for spots, examples of things that might become unstable because of runs. I don't know whether this is that you've actually spotted one or not, but
I'm getting the tap. I don't know if there is a run. It's just it's a concern, and if you learn more, I'd love to chat with you. And I
Gentleman's
yield
time
back.
has expired. The